Okay, so the last thing we're going to look for is the right bisector of a line. So we have this line segment here, AB, and a right bisector, bisect means to cut in half. So to cut in half, what part of the line do we have to find? The midpoint. So we need to find the midpoint. What they mean by right is a right angle. So we're going to be creating some line that goes through the midpoint and is at a right angle to our original line. Okay, so we need to find the equation of this line here. That's what's important to us. So the very first step we're going to do is find the midpoint of this line. Well, in order to find the midpoint of the line, we need two coordinates. We'll take coordinate A and B. Coordinate A is at -3 and 8. And coordinate B is at 7 and 2. Okay. We'll plug it into our formula. X midpoint, Y midpoint is equal to x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Right. Page width. All right, so we take these values. I'm going to call A 0.1, so this will be x1, y1, x2, y2. We're going to plug this in. X1 is -3 plus 7 over 2. And y1 is 8 plus 2 divided by 2. -3 and 7 is 4 over 2. 8 and 2 is 10 over 2, which gives us 2 and 5. So the midpoint of this line is at 2 and 5. I'm quite good at estimating. Okay? So it's about there. Move this over though. So there's the midpoint of the line. That's great. I have that, so we know where it's going to bisect it. We need now to find out the slope of the original line in order to find a line that's perpendicular to this. In order to create a right angle, we need a line perpendicular to the original one, which means we need to know what the slope of the original one is. So I got to use that slope formula we talked about. Remember, M for slope is known as y2 subtract y1 over x2 subtract x1. Well, luckily, I've already named most of these. And I'm going to do it down here so it's easy to see. My y2 was number 2. Subtract y1, which is 8. Divided by x2, which is 7. Subtract -3, which is my x1. So while finding the slope, 2 subtract 8 is -6. 7 subtract -3 is actually 10. As a reduced fraction, this is -3 over 5 as a slope. So this is very important. The slope to line or line segment AB is -3 over 5. Perpendicular to this is very important. It's something called the negative reciprocal. Okay? So perpendicular we need to find the negative. Now this word, I don't even know if I'm going to spell right. I think that's right. And I want you to think of this idea. We need to multiply it by a negative. In other words, -1. And whatever the fraction is, we need to invert the fraction. Okay? We need to flip it. So, a line perpendicular to this, or a slope perpendicular to this, sorry, -3 over 5. When I multiply this by a negative, what do I get? Positive. So now we're one step into it. We've multiplied by the negative, which gives us +3 over 5. And then to invert this, okay, now we have to invert it. What do we get? 5 over 3. So the slope of this line here is +5 over 3, which makes sense. This was a negative slope, and this is a positive slope. So we're looking at 5 over 3, and we need the equation of that line. So the equation of the right bisector is y equals mx plus b. Well, m is 5 over 3. We don't know what the b is. Remember, we always got to find that out. What values do I have? X and y. What are my x and y? Before I even look back up, can anyone remember back to what it is?
Wasn't like 2 and 5?
What is 2 and 5?
The middle.
The middle. The only point that we know that's going to be on this line is that midpoint. So we take that midpoint value of 2 and 5, and that's an x and y value that is on our line. So we take those values of 2 and 5, and we plug them in for the x and y in this equation. So my y becomes 5. My slope is still 5 over 3. My x is 2 plus b. Now we isolate for b. This will give me 10 over 3 plus b is equal to 5. I'm going to change these into fractions. I move 10 over 3 over, and this would become 15 over 3 if I turned it into a fraction. We okay with that? 15 over 3 is a fraction. Technically, this is 5 over 1, and I multiply the top of the fraction and the bottom of the fraction by 3 to get a common denominator. When 10 comes over, it becomes negative 10 over 3 is equal to b. Well, it just so happens we're going to get 5 over 3 is b. So, the equation of this line in the end is y is equal to 5 over 3x plus 5 over 3. That's just a coincidence. I've literally never had that happen before. Okay? But, there you go. So, the y-intercept of this line is at a fraction 5 over 3, which is like, 1 1/3. Where we go? Okay? So, a lot of steps again in order to find the right bisector.